Welcome to the Truth Seeker's Guide, an uplifting podcast that explores the pursuit of truth through various disciplines such as history, spirituality, religion, philosophy, inner work, and science. Faith in Fire, Train the Mind to Thrive Through Trials with Melie Williams, Part 2. Let's jump in. How does a person trust God again after disappointment? Because let's say they give you that snake, and then how do you trust God after that disappointment of
Yeah, it's a constant, it's a decision that you have to just make. Like, for example, just learning how to trust people again too, going through my divorce, and I decide, I could decide I am never putting myself out there again. Like, nobody, I'm not letting anybody in. I am going to be alone, and I'm going to not let anybody hurt me. That's a decision that I am allowed to make, but is that the healthiest decision? We have to weigh out the consequences of that. And the same thing with God. It's like if I decide, so I'm disappointed, God didn't answer my prayer. And there's a lot of, unanswered prayers in the world. We can't know why. I don't even, I've done a little bit of studying on unanswered prayer because it is a topic that I feel, it is very applicable to my life. But it's like, my prayer, say for the restoration of my marriage when I was in the middle of my divorce. I wanted more than anything for God to restore my marriage. He did not do that. So I was disappointed, and I did feel a lack of trust because I'm like, God, if you had done that, I would have known that you were here with me in this, and I would have known that you love me and you care about me. But what I've had to reframe that into thinking is okay, for some reason that didn't happen. Now I can trust that God is going to use the circumstance, and he has, in the people that I have been able to help. Like you said, I would never have been able to walk through divorce with somebody like I can now. I did when I was, about 10 years ago. I was still married, and there was a woman going through divorce in my church, and I was trying to be there for her in the best way that I could. It was a friend of mine, and I was as much of a support as I could be, but she would always say, you have no idea what this is like. You have no idea. And I'd have to just tell her, no, you're right. I don't know what this is like, but here is what I can be for you. I can listen to you. I can support you. I can hug you. I can bring you, food. I can be with you. But yeah, I can't know what you're going through in the way of relating to it. So we have to trust that God, even in our disappointments, there's a reason for them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we may not ever know what that is this side of eternity, but we know who God is. And I would say if somebody's having trouble, they're disappointed and they don't trust God, is to do a study on the characteristics of God, really look at who God is and what the scriptures say about him, because his character never changes. So our circumstances change, our lives change, we get disappointed, we get upset, but God never changes. So if that's true and we believe that, then it's really helpful to go back and look at the characteristics of God, do a study, a word study through all the different ones, look stuff up in a concordance, find the verses that talk about these different characteristics, and just trust that we know if you are a believer, you believe in that scripture is God's word. And so this is what God is saying. So we have to just trust that. It's kind of like, when a little kid doesn't understand why their mom says no to something, and they're like, well, I wanted it, and they're just upset. But the mom knows why she did it. And the child will eventually learn to trust, they might still fight it, but they'll learn to trust that their mom is doing things in their best interest. It's not meant to hurt or cause pain or give us snakes when we supposedly want fish. But, it's just kind of just trusting is so hard. And it's something that I work on all the time. I talk about the characteristics of God. I am doing that. I go through, I bought this study. It's like a different word of who God is every week. And I just try to go through and really understand that and wrestle with it and tell God, I don't feel this. It says here that you are, all good. Well, this doesn't feel good. So help me understand this. I have a very conversational life with God. And I think that helps because, even though, I don't hear a physical voice coming back out at me when I do that, it helps to just connect more. I feel like it's not just like, God is out there somewhere. Like I can feel like I have this personal relationship in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very strong. I mean, like building that intimacy and getting to know his character truly, not just knowing him from an outside perspective or like a story or just something you hear. Because I think that was a big part of what happened in my life for a long. I was Christian for 10 years before I would say, start living in abundance and peace and joy. I felt it the first couple of years like everyone else, I would imagine, but I kind of just went away from it to the point where I felt like, why can't I feel the way I was feeling when I first got converted and whatnot? And I feel like that's what happens, because yes, we do feel this immediate feeling of God and reality, but it's so it can guide us towards the word and towards him and towards this intimacy and towards this growth and knowing his character. Because once you really get to know his character, like you said, it does answer a lot of these other questions that we sometimes think, oh, God's supposed to be all good and perfect in this way and that way. And it just tells us and explains why. Okay. And you often talk about turning pain into power. How do you walk someone through that process?
Yeah, so that process, it's kind of like a multi-step process. So we're going to go, most of the people that I talk to and work with are faith-based. So we start from that perspective. If, our trials that we go through in life, they are part of the calling that God puts on our life. And so he's going to strengthen us through that. And so what we'll do is, first look at it from a spiritual lens, and then, of course, go into things like the neuroscience-backed exercises, the reframes. I will, depending on what someone's going through, suggest like different practices. I always suggest gratitude journaling as something that really will turn the situation you're in. It's not like you're just going to write down a few things in a journal one day and all of a sudden, yay, everything's great. But it's that constant, work. Like I actually started gratitude journaling when I was in the middle of my divorce, which is like the weirdest time to do it, because I felt like I didn't have a lot to be grateful for, if I'm honest. I had like family that was helping me out, and I was, I had a support system, but I was just so like, just stuck in this like negativity. And I thought, I'm going to start a gratitude journal. And I'm so glad that I thought to do that, because, at first, I'll be honest, I used it very passive aggressively sometimes. I'd be like, oh, I'm just so glad that I'm going through this, And so, that's my personality.
No,
God's working on it.
Is so powerful. You're right. Go ahead.
It is. And it actually does change our brains when I practice this thing called gratitude savoring, where you don't just like list out like a few things. You actually will spend time thinking about each one. So, maybe you'll put, I'm grateful for my family, like in your gratitude journal. And then just like spend 20, 30 seconds, like recalling a memory. Like maybe it's a funny conversation that I had with a sibling, or maybe it's, a hug my niece gave me, or just like grounding it in this like very tangible remembrance. So it's like, I'm grateful for this thing, this, family, but let's make it more specific and like really kind of just relive those moments. And those can be really healing for people. Sometimes when people are very negative and they're like, I don't have anything to be grateful for, I will say, okay, what's something that you used to be grateful for? Like what's something that, and they'll say whatever it is, well, I used to be grateful for my house. And okay, what about it? Let's like relive it. And sometimes that can, some people are very averse to doing that, especially if like, it's a painful, I try to say avoid like painful. If it's your house, but you lost your house in a fire, like let's not go there right now while we're trying to like, get you in a better mindset. But something little, it could even be like your dog, like, if you have pets, or a family member, there's surely somebody in your family that you're grateful for. Or sometimes it can just be really simple. Like I've even put in my journal, I'm thankful for, a cup of coffee. Because, whoever discovered coffee, they have to be in heaven just for that, I believe. But it's like, I am grateful for, I can wake up in the morning and have this amazing cup of coffee. And, and I love that. So it's like, yeah, maybe my day, I already know, like I've got all these things and it's stressful and whatnot, but I can just take this moment, this like 30 seconds to 1 minute and just like enjoy. And so I tell people, do that throughout the day. Try to find those moments. It is, though, it's hard, and it does take work.
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of people kind of fall off the process. It's not that it's hard to do, or I guess, like, what is that saying? It's not difficult, but it is hard, because it's like, it's none of this stuff. I mean, it's neuroscience based, but none of it's like requiring you to memorize all these theories and like do all this crazy stuff. It's pretty simple, actually, what you have to do. But what's hard about it is being consistent and just doing it.
Because we're when we come to this, we're not used to doing that. Basically, we're used to looking at all the negative, and maybe that comes from a survival instinct. But we're looking at all the negative and all the bad, and focusing on that more than all of the good. And I like what you said. It was very powerful to not, because I practice gratitude a lot. It's one of the very powerful tool, and I call it, what you're saying is being creative with gratitude, because it's not just, because you ask someone, what are you grateful for? And I do this in the youth group that I speak to. And they'll say, like, the basics. So I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for God. I'm grateful for the church. Those are the main three they would come to. But it just shows how little we think of things we're grateful for the most part. And that should, and that's why I like being creative. Like you said, sometimes it could be as simple as, thank you for just even me not dying at night and waking up this morning and having another day of life. Like, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for not being in a wheelchair and having legs for me, let's say, or being able to walk, or having eyesight, or being able to talk. So I really do believe, even under trials or under different situations, there's always something to be grateful for. Now, for example, if you lose someone you love, right? Yes, you go through a mourning process, not to be like, oh yeah, we're grateful that, no, I mean, but the point is that you could either look at it like, I focus on the fact that a person passed away, because we were all going to pass away. So it's not like something different, or I can focus on the life that I had with this person and be grateful for the life I had and the connections I had with this person. And it's just a matter of shifting this perspective of seeing what God has already given us and what he's continuously giving us and we have, instead of always focusing on what we don't have and what we think we need all the time. But yeah, being creative with gratitude is powerful, but I never used that one that you were saying, which I think is really powerful. Like, not just saying you're grateful for something specifically, in this case could be something creative, but really just focusing on a specific moment. Like you said, like, let's say with family, I'm grateful for my family. I think of that all the time, especially when my brothers or sisters get on my nerves. You know what I mean? So I like to remind myself how grateful I am that they're alive and I love them and they're good. But to actually think of a specific moment that I'm grateful for with them, that's powerful. I've never used that. And I think I would love to apply that in my gratitude practice. All right, awesome. And how do you know when to push through versus when to be still or rest?
Yeah, that's tough, because since we don't know the mind of God and we don't know how things are going to work out, we don't always know, like, when to push through and when to rest. I will say, though, that if it's, if we are pushing through, like, it's like we're doing everything in our own strength, that is a good sign to take a step back. I mean, God tells us to rest. So, and this is one that I work on all the time, because I do not rest. I fill my days. I mean, I work full time. And so my weekends are like when I mostly do like my schoolwork and my podcast and, all the like projects that I have and courses that I'm writing and all this stuff. So it's like, I just, power through, and then I'll get to a point where I'm like, oh, wow, I'm just done, like everything. I haven't taken the rest. So I kind of get forced into it, because I'm burned out. But when we're in a situation, like, let's just say, someone's going through divorce and they're like, what do I do? Like, when do I rest? When do I try? Now, I'm not somebody that says just sit back and just, that advice, I get that advice a lot when it comes to dating. People are like, oh, well, it's because you're trying. Like, once you just do nothing and like just wait and just let God, then that's when, your person will come. And I'm like, well, I work from home and I hardly go out. So like my dude's going to break
Right.
through the door. I don't think that's the way it's going to happen, right? And we would never give that advice to someone looking for a job. Sit on your couch and play video games until your job, someone calls you and offers you a job. No, we'd be like, get out there and look for a job. So, I think we do have a part in it. Like we have to, it's not that, and this has nothing to do with salvation. So I'm not advocating for works there. Sometimes people take that the wrong way. But we do work. Like we do need to do things. We do need to be active in our healing journey, and we have to be active in, expressing to God, like, this is what I want. Like with my divorce, I expressed to God over and over, like, I want restoration. I want this marriage healed. I want my husband to come back. Like I want all of this to happen. I did have to let go of that, and God had to show me, when that time was. And I probably pushed a little bit harder. I was sending messages, and, part of it too, I never got to have closure with my ex. I never got to talk to him again, which is really strange after, I hear people, and I'm not diminishing the pain of it at all, but I hear people who've like dated for 3-4 months and they're like, he just left and he ghosted me and I never got any closure. I'm like, try being ghosted after 14 years of marriage, like it's an odd one to have to contend with. I never really, understood, but I was pushing and I was doing, I was like, I'm going to find a way to like get him to talk to me or whatever. And God had to show me like really clearly, like let it all go. And the way he did that was we had a shared folder, my ex and I, it still existed with like, important documents and whatnot. And one day, I don't even know why I went to look for it, but I opened up my computer and I'm looking for it, and I see my ex's name, and it was his name, and then the word and my name. And I see this folder in my shared drive that's his name, the word and another woman's name. And I'm like, what is that? What is that? So I went to Google and I typed in the woman's first name that I saw and my former last name. Lo and behold, it's his wife, and I'm like, oh, he's married. Like, I had no idea. So all my messages of like, God can restore this and I still love you and all that he was like, I'm not reading your messages anymore. He didn't ever say, hey, look, I have remarried. Like, none of that. He just disregarded all that. I don't even know why. Very weird. But that was how, like, it was the most painful thing. I swear, I thought I was going to have like a heart attack. I didn't know what to do. I was like, I panicked. I was like, okay, like, talk about amygdala hijack. Like, I'm like, when did this happen? Like, this was about, I'm trying to think when I saw it. Maybe I was divorced for just about a year, maybe when I saw this. So I just, totally freaked out. But that was because I was doing it in my strength. Like if I had just prayed and asked God and not been pushing and pushing and pushing and like, sending him messages and doing all this, like maybe I wouldn't have had to find out in such a painful way. Although maybe, what other way can you find that kind of a thing out? But it's a balance. Like, and we don't know. That's the big thing. But if we are taking matters into our own hands in a way that feels a little unwieldy, I would say that's probably not of God. Again, back to the story of like Sarah, like if you want a child, probably, if you're at the point where you're going to have your husband sleep with someone else to get that kid, but you're probably going outside the bounds there, like let's hold off on that, let's explore some other ideas. So I think about that a lot. Like, what am I doing? Is what I'm doing godly? Is what I'm doing helping me? Like by sending those anxious texts to my ex-husband, was I doing anything good? No. And if I look back at it now, the lack of response from him should have been what I needed to see to know, like, I'm pouring out my heart and this person is not reciprocating in any way, shape, or form, and is not even being kind. He normally wouldn't respond. When he would respond, it was like, I don't feel that way about you anymore. Just like short, nasty kind of little things like that. So, so that's kind of, I would say, there's a very long-winded answer.
No,
so I apologize, but yeah, it is something that there's no way of knowing like when to stop and when to continue pressing on. But yeah, definitely work it out with God for each and every scenario.
Yeah. And that's where I feel like we have to start looking into, there's, discernment, there's boundaries, there's growth, there's different things we have to kind of put into play, I think, in all these situations. But one thing I do see biblically is we can't be passive in our mind. We do have to be active in what we're doing. But I believe that when it's out of our control, meaning like, when people do things and it's out of our control, there's what we have to try. Not that it's easy, but we have to try to rest at that moment, meaning when we have no control. And when it's something that we have control, or at least that we have choices or beliefs or things that we get, then we have to push through to make sure that we do what's needed or what's right, or to stay active, whether it's spiritual warfare, whether it's relationships, whatever the case may be. But yeah, rest is important at the right moment, I would say, because of the fact that when we try to control what we can't control, we're really affecting ourselves in such a bad way, where it's going to really affect our lives and on a spiritual level, mental level, on all levels, I would say. Okay. And I was actually, sorry, the next question was, what are signs that someone is burned out spiritually or emotionally?
Well, so if you are burned out spiritually or emotionally, you probably kind of like subconsciously know this, and it's really easy to get to that place, especially in our culture of like hustle and grind and do everything, and people are rewarded for being the person that's up like just doing all the stuff all the time and never taking a break. So if you are somebody who is not resting and not taking that time, I mean, look, even Jesus took naps, right? So. Mm-hmm. We know that is what was modeled for us. And so if you are not resting, that is a sign that if you are not burned out right now, you're probably going to get there, because nobody is Superman. We all need that rest and that break. Other things that kind of signal like a sign of burnout from an emotional place is, are you like snapping at people? Are you real quick to judge? Are you feeling a lot of that anxiety, a lot of that, sort of just, feeling inside where things are just, there's like an electric feeling in you that's like you're looking for what's going to, is that person going to say something bad? Is that person going to, if you're in that mode of like looking at everybody with sort of a critical eye, or, that could be a sign that you are emotionally burned out. Spiritually, I think that we get burned out when we have unmet expectations of God, that those are on us, but yet we still get burned out. Like, if we expect God is going to show up and God is going to give me this thing that I want, and then you don't get it, we can feel burned out because we're like, I gave it my all. I prayed every day. I fasted. I did all these things that God told me, but it's like God never told us to do those things as like a formula. It's not like, okay, fast X number of days for this particular scenario, say, this number of prayers for this kind of scenario. Like, that's just not how it works. And so if we have that mindset, even if we don't realize we do, a lot of us, I think, do. And so we get burned out, and we maybe see ourselves like, Sunday morning rolls around and normally we would go to church, but we're like, you know what? I'm going to watch from home today. Sometimes watching from home is fine. I'm not saying you can't ever watch from home, but if you are somebody who usually goes and you're feeling this like resistance to it, maybe that's a sign. Another sign could be like you just don't want to read your Bible. Like you just feel like, you know what, I'm good. I'm gonna step back from this for a minute, and you might try to justify it for yourself. Like, I've already read the whole Bible. I did like every day through the Bible last year, so I can take a few days off. And it's not that you can't, there's no like, I try to read my Bible every day. I don't do that perfectly, and I don't beat myself up about it when I don't. But if my posture is like, I'm not going to read the Bible, then I know, okay, spiritually I'm burned out, like something's going on. And the best thing to do in that moment is to be really honest with God. Tell him how you feel. Let him know that like, I don't want to read my Bible right now, but I'm going to do it. That's the other thing, is you still do it anyways, because when we are obedient in that, we actually, like, the feelings will follow. They give this advice. I went, years and years ago to a marriage seminar, and it was for, couples that were struggling. And one of the pastors that spoke, he was like, if you don't feel love towards your spouse, do something loving for them. Like husbands, buy your wives flowers. Wives, make them a cup of coffee. Like whatever it is, do something nice for the person that would elicit those feelings of love when they're grateful. Like, oh, thank you for this coffee. And now all of a sudden you're talking, and you do the action, and then that can produce the feeling. So if you continue to read the scripture, even when you don't feel connected to God, ask God, like, Lord, I want to be connected to you right now, but I'm not feeling a connection to you. Like, show up for me, please, and you just do it anyway. So yeah, those are the signs and kind of what I would do in that to get out of it.
Yeah. We are going to be we're going to have days where we're weaker. We're going to have days where we don't feel up to the task. And that's when I feel, like you said, it's important to reach out to the Holy Spirit, be like, give me strength for this. Because I do agree. There are moments, for example, where I don't want to meet for the meeting. I'm too tired. I don't want to read the Bible, whatever the case may be. But those are the moments that kind of show me that I got to push through more, because that means that something is lacking there, and it's causing me to be weaker, which is causing me to not want to do this. But every time, and maybe you can agree here, is that every time we do push through, when it's something spiritual in this sense, when we're done with that reading or that meeting, we always like, man, I'm so glad I did it. You know what I mean? Like, it just feels like replenishing. Like, it just feels like, oh, thank God, that he gave me the strength to really just push through this situation, because this is, so when I do have those feelings, it's almost like I have to push harder, knowing, kind of like if you're training for anything or going to the gym or you train for a marathon, the days you feel like you don't want to go is the days you have to push yourself to go, to keep this going. Because if not, that day will turn into another day you don't want to go, and then another day you don't want to go, and then eventually you're back at zero, and it's not easy, but awesome. And how do we build boundaries while still walking in grace, would you say?
Yeah, that's important, because we definitely, like, you want to, protect what it is that you allow into your life. So, like, what you watch, what you listen to, protecting where your time goes. I always say, like, so in those seasons, like, I like to limit any voices that feed into my anxiety or my frustration or shame. So sometimes that means unfollowing people on social media if they, tend to be, people that I just feel less than or whatever. Like, sometimes you need to set that boundary and be like, okay, I'm not going to follow those kind of accounts. Another important boundary during these kinds of seasons, I think, is around availability. And that means like time, but it also means information. So you don't owe everybody access to you at all times, and you don't owe everybody all the information about you. And where that, like, I learned that the hard way was when I was going through my divorce. I was on social media and I was sharing to my account all the time, like, all about the divorce and a lot of really vulnerable stuff. And I don't think that we should not be vulnerable. I'm not saying don't be vulnerable online. I try to share examples from my real life. But you don't owe anyone to share everything. So if there's something you're going through and you don't want to share it, you don't have to. Even like, the top influencers, like, they can have privacy. People are always like shocked, like, how did nobody know this was It's like, because this is somebody else's life, they get to set the boundaries of what you get brought in on as a spectator and what you don't. So some things, are just not for sharing. I would say, like, guard your hope. So speaking life over your situation, you may have people in your life that are wanting to rehearse with you the worst case scenarios. And, you don't have to be toxically positive, but, if you are around people that are like, oh, this is going to happen and this is going to happen, you can politely say, hey, you know what, I'm choosing to focus on this instead. And here's how I'm reframing this, and if you need to put a boundary around that person instead, then you might need to do that. Another thing is, if in this season you find yourself in these negative spirals, finding ways to, like, laugh, find a friend to talk to, make sure you're taking care of your body and mind. Those are boundaries that, like, are must have. So for me, I have a time set aside. It's, between 5 to 6 days a week. Sometimes it can't always be all 6, but I have my workout time. That is my time. That is my boundaried time that I know I can get my workout in. So if somebody says, hey, can I call you at this time? It's a no. I mean, obviously, if it's like an emergency or something, there's always room for moving things around. But I do have certain things, like, in my calendar as boundaries for me, my time to do things. And it's not selfishness. I have seen, people are like, oh, you're just going to work out. That's selfish. No, I actually have to. If I don't, like, especially for the fact that, I do have ADHD and I can become very dysregulated. Doing exercise is like having medication for me. Like, that's like how serious I take it. You wouldn't put off taking medication that you need. I'm not going to put off, working out, because I need it for my body to build up the dopamine levels that naturally are lower for me than, for somebody who's not, for somebody who's neurotypical. So I think just, finding, and everybody's going to have their own take on that. Everybody's going to have their own boundaries they need to set. Sometimes it's releasing people from your life that you just can't have in your life. It's like, unfollow people on social media, but sometimes it's people, and that's hard. I did an episode on graceful goodbyes, and what brought that about was a friendship that I had developed for several years after my divorce, and it was incredibly toxic. And I wanted it to remain, and I wanted it to stay, but this person was a very negative presence in my life and brought me down a lot. And I finally had to set that boundary and say, this friendship unfortunately has to end. And there's a graceful way to do that. I would never advocate for like just blocking somebody. And I'm not a dating coach, so I know there are some of them who will say, oh, if it's somebody like that, you can just block them and move on. But I do believe in communicating with people unless, it's like you're in danger,
Right.
which I was not. So, but communicating that and being willing to do the awkward thing for yourself, that's a boundary. You have to say like, hey, this might hurt for a minute. This might be an awkward conversation, but this person is harming my well-being. And so I do need to set a boundary with them. I always try first to set a boundary with the person and say, hey, these are topics that, I just can't go there with you, or I need you to, whatever, XYZ. And then if they, aren't going to respect that boundary that you've set, then you might have to let that person go from your life, either for a time or for good.
Yeah. Yeah, those boundaries are important. I mean, and like the Bible says, there's a time for everything under the sun. So just putting it all in the right place and knowing that, we got to, there's a time for everything. I can't just try to do everything all at once. But okay, awesome. And what kind of support system should we look for during trials?
Yeah, so community is very important and having support is very important. So I am somebody that has, when I was going through my divorce, it was in the middle of the lockdown. So I didn't have the resources necessarily available that would have been ideal. I did find a group that I met with online. But there is something, if you can, I always suggest trying to find in-person groups and ways of being with other people, especially if you are somebody who works remotely or spends most of your time doing things, that are on the computer, that doesn't feel as connecting. It can be better than nothing, but finding those groups and people to be with. I will say, like, finding groups that are going through what you're going through can be really helpful, but they can also, it's just like a, flip side, they can be not harmful. I don't want to use that term, but there's a time and a place for them, I will say. And then there's a time and a place to like move past them. When I was first going through my divorce, I did join a group for people going through divorce. And one thing that struck me was somebody in the group was very upset about their divorce. And I was trying to be, understanding and listening and empathetic. And I was, saying, oh, well, here's what has happened for me. Now at this point, I'm like 6 months into the process. So it took about a year. I'm about 6 months into the process of getting a divorce. And this person was 10 years post-divorce. And it just hit me I was like, oh, wow. I don't want that to be my story. Like, I don't want to be in this group crying about my, ex-husband 10 years from now. So I am going to find other groups. So classes at church, I got involved in ministry, which was interesting because I felt very unqualified to be involved in ministry. I lead worship at several different studies and I fill in at various churches in my area as a worship leader. And I especially felt like, I'm not allowed to do that. I'm divorced. And I would tell everybody all my dirty laundry, here's why I'm unqualified to be your worship leader. Are you want to have me? And they'd be like, well, it was probably really awkward. But finding a way to be involved, if maybe it's just, greeting people at the door, maybe it's, handing out coffee or, whatever, options your church has, but finding a way to get involved with people that are, more involved, I would say in the church is a great way to build true community. It is hard. I'm still struggling to find a full-on community. I do have one church that I attend regularly. And then of course I go to other churches to, lead worship and stuff. And I wouldn't say that I'm still kind of always I don't know, I don't know that God has this place for me, but I'm still figuring it out. It is hard, especially the older we get, the more set in our ways we are. It's hard to find those groups and people. But, even I have found great community in things like there's this entrepreneurs group that I joined, and I just go, and it's different people every time. And, some of the people are like not believers by any standard. And then I always, if there is a believer there, I tend to find them. And, but there's a lot of community that you can build in other ways. Like maybe if you really enjoy hiking, like maybe there's a hiking group. Like it doesn't have to be this, like, it can feel very, stressful. I feel like if you are, say, going through divorce and you try to find a divorce group and all they're going to talk about for 2 hours is divorce. And that's like the last thing you want, right? When you're in the midst of it. And so, just being open. And if you need to, get professional community. There is no shame in hiring a counselor or a therapist or a coach. I did that, I've worked with all of those because when you need help and you need community, sometimes you do need a professional's opinion. And sometimes it's just like, I had somebody, I'm like, honestly, I'm paying you to be my friend right now. Like, I don't know anybody. I've moved and I just need someone to talk to, and that's kind of how it started. And then, of course, I got a lot out of it. But so there's a lot of ways to build community. But the important thing is just to be diligent about it and know that you're not going to like meet 10 new best friends in 5 minutes. It's going to be a process.
And this is a little off topic, but you were saying you were studying. What are you studying now in school?
Yeah, so I'm getting my Master's of Science in Applied Neuroscience.
Oh, cool. Very interesting. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, and then let's go back to this. What has adversity taught you about God that comfort never could?
Well, I mean, adversity is, it's that's an interesting way to put it, because it's like, all of us think probably, oh, I would just rather not have adversity in my life, right? Like I'd rather just have this cool, amazing, like, easygoing life. And yet, like, it is through adversity that we actually like not only learn like who we are, but what we're capable of. It's usually through adversity that I have found, like for myself, the biggest like challenges have become like some of my, greatest joys in some way. I'm not saying that the divorce was my greatest joy, but for example, I started, my podcast after going through all of that. And I would never have had the stories to share or I would never have probably started studying neuroscience, for example, had it not been for the fact that I was, in my coaching and counseling that I did, somebody was sharing with me all of these techniques and exercises. And I was fascinated by, does this match with what, with the Bible? Like, is this something that, and I was just so pleased when I started like putting the pieces together. So I would say that, and I've learned like a lot of the healing happens, in that middle piece of adversity. And we want to be whole and we want to be helpful to others and we want to be like, someone that God can use. And in order to be that, like, unfortunately, we do have to go through trials, and living a life of comfort is, it's not all it's cracked up to be. I mean, it sounds like it, but you look at like all these celebrities that have supposedly everything, you see they can buy the mansions and they have all the adoring fans, and we would, without knowing all their circumstances, we might think they live such a life of comfort from like a, monetary standpoint and from a fame and whatever standpoint. A lot of them are very miserable. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. And that's because comfort, when you just get everything like handed to you, like we don't work for it, we don't understand the struggles of things, like it's not fulfilling. That's just not how we were created.
We don't see the value of those things without the work, without the struggle. Yeah. Like giving a kid everything without ever understanding the value of money, but giving him everything already at once. It's more damaging.
Yep.
All right. And how has your walk through fire changed your view of God, yourself, and others?
Yeah, so my view of God, I would say before I went through everything, was probably fairly small. I was a believer. I was involved in a church and everything, but it was more of like, something I did and I believed. I wouldn't say I wasn't like a true believer, but it wasn't like the most important thing in my life, if I'm honest. I had a lot of things that were competing for my attention all the time, and God was there, and I prayed, but not every day, and I read my Bible, but not every day, and through that, like coming to see God as, just first and foremost, the creator of all things, and really like understanding that and like coming to a place of reverence for that, and then understanding like how he designed, our, even just like our brains, our minds, everything that, everything in our life that happens that he is fully aware of and is with us in the midst of, changed my view of God to like this sort of outside force of like, oh, he's God, and someday I'll see him in heaven, to like needing God every single day and knowing that like he is with me, and he is, no matter, even when he's silent or I perceive silence in, in a prayer, he is with me and I can rely on him. I can trust him. I feel connected to God in a way that I definitely didn't before. As far as connecting with like other people, I think, I'm somebody that I don't have like a ton of like acquaintances or friends or anything. I'm more of like a small group, go deep with like a small number of people kind of person.
Mhm.
But after my divorce, like I lost a lot of my friends and pretty much everybody that I had in my support network. I was a military spouse, and my ex was still active duty. And when he remarried and all that, and that, that community, they are all together, they're together all the time for all kinds of events. So I wasn't going to be able to remain with that group of
Right.
friends. Like they're now friends, I'm sure, with his new wife. And so it was very painful. I had to, it was very hard to start over being more introverted and not necessarily, and then it was COVID, so it was even worse. So with people, I've had to learn how to really go out on a limb and try to connect with people, which is not something I kind of just like let relationships happen. And the people that were close in my proximity became sort of who I was close with. And now I have to like seek out connection and put myself out more. I have to like start conversations. And so that has been a change too. But I think for the best, I mean, I'm still trying to find those people that are going to be my inner circle now, but at the same time, it's like, I know God will bring the right people into my life. So, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. I believe once we basically, because I still believe that being social and being around people is something we need as people. We it's healthy for us in many ways. So that's where like seeking the kingdom of God and his righteousness, aligning with his truth, all that stuff is going to be added. And not by us being passive, but by us remaining active in him and seeking that and remaining active, and not just, like I said, like you were saying, not just staying at home waiting for things to fall in your lap, but being active with it and still being active, going out and doing what we have to do so God can use us in many ways. And that's the way we also tend to grow that way as well. Awesome. And the last question I had here for you was, what would you tell your past self in the middle of your hardest season?
I would tell my past self, just to hold on, like don't give up, don't send the crazy texts probably. But I would also tell my past self, like, you're not crazy and you're not like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're grieving, you're not broken. One day, this is going to become your testimony. This is going to help others. Like, you don't have to have all the answers right now. And also, I would just say, like, I think when we go through things, it's really easy to like feel a lot of shame and guilt and like, oh, I should have done this and I could have done that. But just, I would remind my past self, like, you did the best you could with what you had at the time. Like, sure, I have tools now that would, I would hope that I would go through something like that. Hope I never have to go through something like that again. But if I do, I have tools that would help me get through it in a healthier way. But not, I would tell past self to not, don't beat yourself up, Melie. You did what you could. And look at, fruit came from what happened. And, that's the grieving process. It's not pretty, but, it will become a testimony that you can use and you will help other people with it.
Awesome. Yeah, I would probably tell myself also, like, just, no one or anything or anyone really can give you this full peace and happiness and abundance that God and truth can inside of us, and that way, little by little, God will help us align and see it in his way. But yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Melie. Thank you for your heart, your wisdom, and everything you were going over with your Fire Forge faith and everything you're doing. If you're listening today, and what I wanted to ask also is there anything that you would like to share with anyone as far as where they could reach out, or your podcast, or anything that just for yourself?
Yeah, so my podcast is called Diamonds in Dumpster Fires, and it's available on all the usual platforms, so you can look it up there. I'm also at diamondsindumpsterfires.com, and then for Instagram, I'm at Melie Williams, and that's Melie Williams. So yeah, I would love to chat with anybody who has questions about the episode, or just wants to join me over there.
Awesome. And if you're listening today and feel like you're still in the middle of the furnace, just know this: God doesn't waste fire. He uses it to refine, strengthen, and reveal what cannot be shaken. Until next time, then, remember, you're not just walking through fire, you're being formed by it. Thank you guys for joining us on today's episode. If you like what you saw and heard, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And remember, you can make it heaven, you can make it hell. The choice is yours.